Welcome to From the Heart, the channel that begins to delve into emotional abuse and how toxic relationships affect not only our emotions, but our thoughts, behaviors, and most importantly, our sense of self-worth. Here, we'll discuss how and why we end up in toxic relationships and understand how we can make decisions that are right for us. We'll also discuss how we can grow healthier and stronger as we focus on our self-worth and develop self-love. My name is Sonia Gandhi, and I'm a therapist, and I'll be your host, so please be my guest. Chances are you've heard of the many self-words. There's self-esteem, self-compassion, self-acceptance, self-respect, self-confidence, self-love, self-care, and so on. There are so many words to describe how we feel about ourselves, how we think about ourselves, and how we act towards ourselves. It's understandable if they all start to blend in together. However, they are indeed different concepts with unique meanings, findings, and purposes. I wanted to begin discussing some of these words and concepts. So, self-confidence is described with a few points: recognizing and emphasizing your strengths, rewarding and praising yourself with progress and efforts that you've made, having reasonable and achievable expectations of yourself, so recognizing that you're not perfect, treating yourself with kindness and compassion. Self-confidence is not an overall evaluation of yourself, but a feeling of confidence and competence in more specific areas. For example, you could have a high amount of self-worth, but low self-confidence when it comes to sports, public speaking, or your ability to cook. It's not necessary to have a high sense of self-esteem and self-confidence in every area of your life. There are naturally some things that you simply are not good at, and other areas in which you will succeed in. The important thing is to have self-confidence in the activities in your life that matter to you and a high sense of self-worth you have about your whole being. I want to hone in a little here about self-worth. It's defined by Merriam-Webster as a feeling that you are a good person who deserves to be treated with respect. Self-worth is at the very core our very selves. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are intimately tied into how we view our worthiness and value as human beings. But what we often do is use our self-confidence as our measure of our self-worth. So let me give you a personal example. I was raised in a very strict household where expectations were very high, especially around school and grades. I didn't do well in elementary school, much to my parents' dismay. Then I did better in high school, but I certainly wasn't valedictorian. Teachers would always describe me as not using my full potential. I have to say, growing up, I hated that word. So I based my value, that is, my self-worth, on how I did in school. But what I've realized is that I was basing my worth on something my parents valued, not what I valued. What I've also realized is that many of us compare ourselves to others, and somehow we believe that others are better than us. So, of course, I started to compare my grades to my friends, who were doing much better than me. So I thought less of myself. Then, as I got older, I compared the path I chose in university to be a social worker rather than a doctor or a lawyer. Again, what my parents wanted. I always heard, you won't get rich being a social worker. So then I started to think, money also defines who we are in the world and how we show up. Then the very common area that, especially as women, which is held against us, and we are held to a high standard of beauty, represented by extremely thin supermodels who don't eat and always look like they're ready to go to a gala ball. The messages that social media has thrust upon us is unrealistic and unacceptable. But yet, looking in the mirror, we measure ourselves by a very unrealistic and external value, not ours, but society's value. And of course, one of the biggest variables is weight. Our body image affects our sense of confidence, which we also interpret as self-worth. So, our value, self-worth, self-confidence, and so on is defined by us comparing ourselves to others. But as I've gotten older, what I've realized is that the people we compare ourselves to are struggling with all the same things. If you listen to superstars talk about their lives, they are no different from us. Many of them struggled with weight issues, poverty, trauma, and so on. Yet we compare ourselves to those that look perfect. But here's the real truth. They are all human, just like you and they struggle with all of the same issues of self. It's easy to get caught up in chasing money, status, beauty, and popularity, especially when things are highly valued by those around us and by society in general. So, what are some of the things we can do to move closer to valuing ourselves? Well, make an effort to take a step back and think about what truly matters when determining people's worth. So, kindness, compassion, empathy, respect for others, and how well we treat those around us. Work on identifying, challenging, and externalizing your critical inner voice. We all have that inner critic that loves to nitpick and points out the things we do wrong or things that we're not good enough at. It's natural to let this inner critic get the best of us, but if we let it win too often, the voice starts to think that it's right. Challenge that voice on the things it whispers in your ear and remind it that no matter what you do or don't do, you are worthy and valuable all the same. So, how does self worth show up in relationships? One of the most common mistakes you see people with low self esteem make is to base their self worth on one aspect of their lives, and often that aspect is a relationship. Well, depending on our sense of self before we get into a relationship, it can truly affect who we attract and how dependent we become on the other, or how we define ourselves in that relationship. It's an understandable tendency to let someone else's love for you encourage you to feel better about yourself. It somehow makes us feel that there must be some redeeming qualities if we are in a loving relationship, or heck, in a relationship at all. And conversely, if we aren't in a relationship, then there is something inherently wrong with us. At least that's what we think. This dysfunctional belief is fraught with risks of entering in and then staying in a relationship that may be toxic. But often, staying in the relationship may not have to do with love, but rather fear. Now, that fear can vary depending on that inner critic. We may stay because if we leave, there is a faulty thinking that there may be something wrong with you, that you are difficult, and so on. Things not based in truths, just fears. If we stay in a toxic relationship, or not even toxic relationships, but we are not happy with ourselves, we put a lot of weight on how our partner sees us. We define ourselves by it. But it begs the question, are we happy with ourselves? With or without our partner? The love for another person does not define us, nor does it define our value as a person. Whether you are single, casually seeing people, building a solid relationship with someone, or celebrating your 30th wedding anniversary with your spouse, you are worthy of love and respect, and you should make time to practice self-acceptance and self-compassion. This is true for people of any relationship status, but it may be especially important for those in long-term relationships. Don't make the mistake of thinking that your partner's love is what makes you worthy of love. If anything ever happens to your partner or to your relationship, you don't want to be forced to build up your sense of self-worth from scratch. It can make breakups and grief much harder than they need to be. And sometimes we don't leave for that reason, although the relationship may have flaws which we should consider leaving because of. Although this facet of the issue might be enough to encourage you to work on your self-worth, there's another reason it's important. Having a healthy sense of self-worth will actually make your relationship better, unless you are in a toxic relationship, of course. And if you are able to work on and develop your self-worth, it will give you the strength to leave a toxic relationship and work towards a healthy one, because you realize you are worth it. When you learn to love yourself, you become better able to love someone else. People with high self-respect tend to have more satisfying, loving, and stable relationships than those who do not, precisely because they know that they need to first find their worth, esteem, and happiness within themselves. Join me next week for specific strategies to start building your self-worth bit by bit and learn how to manage that inner critic. In the meantime, I hope you will also listen to the first of many affirmations so that you can start to chip away at those thoughts that have no basis in reality, just old programming.